How does a quiet father, dismissed as an afterthought at his only daughter's wedding dinner, turn a public humiliation into the ultimate reversal? When my future son-in-law told me to watch the wedding from home, and my daughter snapped back at him, nobody expected what would follow. They had no idea I was about to make them regret underestimating me, with their reputations, their jobs, and their fortunes on the line. The upscale Italian restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking silverware, but our table felt like a battlefield disguised as a family dinner. I'm Paul Benton, 58 years old, and I'd been dreading this evening for weeks. My daughter Holly's engagement dinner with her fiancé Ethan Carter and his parents was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a tribunal where I was the unwelcome defendant. Philip and Kalia Carter sat across from me, their designer clothes and practiced smiles radiating the kind of old money confidence that made people like me feel invisible. Philip's steel gray hair was perfectly styled, and Kalia's diamond earrings probably cost more than I made in 3 months as a mid-level accountant. They'd been polite enough when we first arrived, but their eyes kept sliding past me like I was part of the furniture. "Paul, you mentioned you work in accounting," Kalia asked, her tone suggesting she was discussing something mildly distasteful. "How?" "Practical." I forced a smile. 26 years with Henderson and Associates. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. Philip chuckled, the sound sharp. "Well, someone has to handle the paperwork, I suppose." He turned to Ethan, his 30-year-old son who managed a sales team at some tech firm. "Speaking of which, how's the quarterly projection looking?" Just like that, I was excluded from the conversation. Holly caught my eye across the table, her expression apologetic. At 27, she'd inherited her mother's fierce intelligence and my stubborn streak. She worked in software development and had built quite a successful career for herself. I was proud of her, even if the Carters seemed to think her accomplishments were somehow diminished by my humble background. The evening continued with subtle slights. When I raised my glass for a toast to the happy couple, Kalia looked at her phone. When I mentioned how proud I was of Holly's recent promotion, Philip interrupted to discuss wedding venues. Ethan, meanwhile, kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. I'd dealt with their condescension before. Ever since Holly started dating Ethan 2 years ago, his family had made it clear they considered me beneath their notice. I was the widowed father with the modest house and the ordinary job, hardly the kind of in-law they'd envisioned for their golden boy. But then Ethan leaned over and tapped my shoulder. "Listen, Paul," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough volume for the whole table to hear. "My parents and I have been talking about the wedding arrangements. They don't really want you at the ceremony. You understand, right? It's going to be a very exclusive affair. But don't worry. We'll set up a live stream. You can watch it online from home." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then cold. Around us, the restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade away. I was aware of other diners at nearby tables glancing over, sensing the tension. I tried to process what he'd just said. They didn't want me at my own daughter's wedding. They wanted me to watch it on a computer screen like some distant acquaintance who couldn't make the trip. I started, but my voice caught. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I see." Holly's face had gone white, then red. "What did you just say?" "Holly, please," Ethan said, his tone patronizing. "You know how important this day is to our families. My parents have very specific ideas about what?" Holly's voice was rising. Other diners were definitely staring now. "About excluding my father from the most important day of my life?" Kalia reached across the table. "Darling, you have to understand. This is a very high-profile event. The guest list has been carefully curated." "Curated?" Holly stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Her voice carried across the entire restaurant now. "You want to curate my father out of my wedding?" I sat there, frozen, trying to maintain some dignity while my world crumbled around me. This was my only child, my daughter, the most important person in my life. I'd walked her to school every day for 6 years after her mother passed away. I'd worked double shifts to pay for her college. I'd been there for every milestone, every heartbreak, every triumph, and they wanted me to watch her wedding on a computer screen. "Holly, calm down," Ethan said, his face flushing. "You're making a scene." "Good," Holly's voice cracked with fury. "Maybe I should make a scene. Maybe everyone in this restaurant should know what kind of people you are." She turned to face Ethan directly, her hands shaking with rage. "You know what, Ethan? If your parents don't want my father at our wedding, then maybe you should find yourself a new wife. And while you're at it, find yourself a new job, too. Because I'm done with this whole family." The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. Servers stood frozen with plates in their hands. Even the background music seemed to have paused. Ethan's face cycled through several shades of red. Have you lost your mind? Holly, come to your senses. This is just about the wedding arrangements. Don't be so dramatic. I found my voice finally, though it came out quieter than I intended. I heard everything perfectly well, Ethan. You're all crazy, Ethan snapped, standing up so abruptly his wine glass tipped over. The red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth in a vivid stain. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, including his own parents, he leaned over and shoved my plate aside in open contempt. Absolutely insane, he muttered, grabbing his jacket. All of you. He stormed out of the restaurant, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence. Philip and Kalia sat frozen, their faces masks of horror and embarrassment. Holly remained standing, tears streaming down her cheeks, her chest heaving with anger and hurt. I sat there, looking down at my ruined dinner, the saliva glistening on the pasta I'd barely touched. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. But underneath the shame, something else was growing, something cold and calculating. I reached for my napkin and wiped my mouth carefully, then placed it on the table. I looked up at the staring faces around us and forced myself to smile. A small, quiet smile that probably looked more unsettling than reassuring. My phone buzzed with a text message. Holly had already pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen even as tears continued to fall. The message was simple. We need to talk. I'm coming over tonight. I nodded to her across the table, then stood up slowly. Philip? Kalia? I said politely, as if nothing unusual had happened. Thank you for dinner. I think we'll be going now. As Holly and I walked out of that restaurant together, I was already thinking ahead. They thought they'd humiliated a harmless old man who would slink away quietly. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Back in my living room that night, I sat in my worn leather recliner and tried to make sense of what had happened. The house felt too quiet without Holly there yet. She'd said she needed to stop by her apartment first to grab some things. The silence gave me too much time to think. This wasn't the first time Ethan's family had made me feel like an outsider. Over the past 2 years, there had been a steady pattern of small humiliations, each one designed to remind me of my place in their social hierarchy. I remembered Holly's 26th birthday party last year. The Carters had insisted on hosting it at their country club, claiming they wanted to do something special for her. When I arrived, I found they'd seated me at a table in the back corner with people I'd never met, distant relatives and plus ones who seemed as confused about their placement as I was. Meanwhile, Holly sat at the head table with Ethan's family and their circle of wealthy friends. When I'd tried to give a toast to my daughter, Philip had smoothly interrupted, claiming they were running behind schedule and needed to move on to the cake cutting. I'd spent the rest of the evening watching from the sidelines as the Carters presented Holly with expensive gifts and talked about their grand plans for her future, plans that never seemed to include me. Then there was Christmas. Ethan had convinced Holly to spend it at his family's estate in Connecticut. Just this once, he'd said. My grandmother is getting old, and it might be her last Christmas. I'd spent the day alone in my house, eating a frozen dinner and watching old movies, while my daughter celebrated with her new family 3 states away. The Easter incident still stung. Kalia had organized an elaborate brunch and specifically told Holly it was immediate family only. When Holly asked if I could come, Kalia had laughed and said, "Oh, darling, we meant immediate family of the couple. You know, people who will actually be related after the wedding." Each slight had been carefully crafted to seem reasonable on the surface. They never outright said I wasn't welcome, they just made sure I knew I didn't belong. But tonight had been different. Tonight, they'd finally said what they'd been thinking all along. I heard Holly's key in the front door around 9 o'clock. She came in looking exhausted, her eyes red from crying, carrying an overnight bag and her laptop case. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said before she'd even fully closed the door. "I can't believe he did that to you. I can't believe any of this." I stood up and pulled her into a hug. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. You stood up for me when it mattered most." We sat down on the couch together, and Holly curled up next to me like she used to when she was little and had a bad day at school. "I keep thinking about everything that led up to this," she said quietly. "All the times they made you feel unwelcome, all the times I should have said something but didn't. I was so caught up in trying to fit into their world that I forgot what really mattered." "You were in love," I said. "People do things that don't make sense when they're in love." "But that's just it, Dad. I don't think I was in love with Ethan anymore. I think I was in love with the idea of him, with the life he represented. The fancy dinners, the expensive vacations, the country club memberships. I lost sight of who I really am. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years to give Holly the opportunities she needed. After her mother passed away when Holly was 12, I'd worked 60-hour weeks to pay for her private school tuition. I'd taken out loans to cover her college expenses, even when my financial advisor warned me it would push back my retirement by at least 5 years. I'd used my savings to help her with the down payment on her apartment, and I'd never once asked her to pay me back. I'd done it all gladly, because that's what fathers do. But the Carters had never seen those sacrifices. They'd only seen the end result, a successful young woman they could mold into their vision of the perfect daughter-in-law. "Holly," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Are you having second thoughts about this marriage?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. "I think I've been having second thoughts for months," she finally admitted. "But tonight, when Ethan spat on your plate, Dad, I saw who he really is, and I saw who his family really is. They're not good people." "What about your job?" I asked. "Doesn't Ethan have some influence at your company?" Holly's expression darkened. "That's another thing I need to tell you. Ethan's been making comments lately about how I won't need to work after we're married. He keeps talking about me focusing on family and supporting his career. And his mother has been dropping hints about how modern women try to do too much, and how a happy marriage requires sacrifice." A chill ran down my spine. "They want you to quit your job?" "I think they want me to quit being me," Holly said. "They want me to become some version of myself that fits their idea of what a Carter wife should be. Quiet, supportive, decorative, someone who hosts charity luncheons and doesn't have opinions about anything important. We talked until nearly midnight, and by the time Holly went to bed in her old room, we'd both come to the same conclusion. This engagement needed to end, but it wasn't going to be easy. Ethan wasn't the type to accept rejection gracefully, and his family had the kind of money and connections that could make life difficult for people who crossed them. But as I lay in bed that night, I wasn't thinking about how to avoid conflict. I was thinking about something else entirely. Over the years, I'd learned that being underestimated could be an advantage. People like the Carters saw a quiet accountant and assumed that meant I was weak, that I didn't understand how power really worked. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee. The caller ID showed Ethan's name, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Paul?" Ethan's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk. Holly isn't answering her phone, and I think you've been filling her head with ideas." "I don't think Holly needs anyone to fill her head with ideas," I said calmly. "She's a smart woman who can think for herself." "Look, I know last night got out of hand. Maybe I overreacted. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under from my family. They have very high standards." "High enough to exclude the father of the bride from his daughter's wedding?" There was a pause. "That wasn't my idea. But Paul, you have to see this from our perspective. This wedding is going to be covered by society magazines. There will be photographers, influential people. My family has a reputation to maintain. And apparently, I don't fit that reputation." "It's not personal," Ethan said, though his tone suggested it absolutely was. "It's just business. Social business. You understand?" I understood perfectly. I also understood that this conversation was far from over. "Ethan," I said, "I think you should focus on talking to Holly. She's the one whose opinion matters here." "Yeah, well, maybe Holly needs to remember who's been taking care of her lately, who's been paying for her lifestyle upgrades, who got her the connections that advanced her career. She might want to think carefully before she burns bridges." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I felt that cold calculation stirring in my chest again. "I'll be sure to pass along your message," I said, and hung up. Holly emerged from her room an hour later, looking more determined than I'd seen her in months. "I've been thinking all night," she said. "I want to end this engagement, but I'm worried about the fallout. Ethan has connections at my company, and his family knows people everywhere. They could make things very difficult for both of us." I poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her at the kitchen table. "Holly, I want to ask you something else. Do you trust me?" "Of course, Dad, completely." "Then I want you to know that whatever happens next, I'm going to make sure you're protected. But I might need your help with some things, and I might not be able to explain everything right away." She studied my face carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that the Carters made a mistake when they decided to treat us like we don't matter, and I'm thinking that sometimes the best offense is a good offense." Holly smiled for the first time since the disaster at the restaurant. "What do you need me to do?" The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Gerald Franklin's law office downtown. Gerald and I had been friends for over 20 years. We'd met when he'd handled my wife's estate after she passed, and we'd stayed in touch ever since. He was one of the few people who knew exactly how much I'd sacrificed for Holly over the years, and he'd always been straight with me about legal matters. His office was in one of those converted brownstones that managed to look both professional and welcoming. Gerald met me in his conference room, a thin man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Paul, you sounded upset on the phone. What's going on?" I told him everything. The dinner, Ethan's humiliation, Holly's decision to end the engagement, and Ethan's subtle threats about her career. Gerald listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "So, you're concerned about retaliation," he said when I finished. "I'm concerned about protecting my daughter. Ethan's family has money and connections. If they decide to make life difficult for Holly, they probably can." Gerald leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about Holly's assets. Her apartment, her savings, any joint accounts or property with Ethan." "She owns her apartment outright. I helped with the down payment, but the deed is in her name only. She has a good savings account, a solid 401k. As far as I know, she and Ethan don't have any joint property yet, though I think they were planning to buy a house after the wedding." Good. What about gifts? Has Ethan given her anything expensive? Jewelry, cars, anything like that?" I thought about it. An engagement ring, obviously. He bought her a car last year, said her old one wasn't reliable enough, and he's been paying for a lot of their lifestyle upgrades. Expensive dinners, vacations, that sort of thing. Gerald made more notes. "Here's what I'm thinking. If Holly wants to end this engagement cleanly, she needs to be prepared for Ethan to claim she owes him money. The car, the ring, possibly even some of those vacation expenses. People like the Carters are very good at using financial obligations to control people." "What can we do about that?" "First, we document everything. Every gift, every payment, every expense. We figure out what's legally a gift versus what could be construed as a loan. Second, we make sure Holly's assets are protected. If there's going to be a legal battle, we want to make sure her apartment and savings are secure." I nodded. "Oh, what else?" Gerald smiled slightly. "Well, that depends on how far you're willing to go. You mentioned that Ethan made threats about Holly's career. If you can document those threats, that gives us leverage. And if Ethan or his family try to retaliate against either of you, we want to have a paper trail ready." We spent the next hour going over the details. Gerald helped me set up a secure email account and showed me how to back up text messages and phone calls. He also gave me the contact information for a private investigator he trusted, just in case. By the time I left his office, I had a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't fully developed yet, but the foundation was there. That afternoon, I drove to Ethan's condo under the pretense of returning some of Holly's things she'd left there. Ethan lived in one of those luxury high-rises downtown, all glass and steel and artificial sophistication. The doorman knew me from previous visits and waved me through to the elevator. I knocked on Ethan's door, carrying a small box of Holly's books and personal items. When he answered, he looked surprised to see me. "Paul, what are you doing here?" "Holly asked me to return these," I said, holding up the box. "She didn't feel comfortable coming herself." Ethan's expression hardened. "So she's really going through with this? She's really going to throw away everything we've built together?" "That's between you and Holly," I said. "I'm just returning her things." He stepped aside to let me in, and I could hear voices from the living room. Todd Green, Ethan's business partner, was there along with another man I didn't recognize. They were sitting around Ethan's glass coffee table with papers spread out between them. "Just put the box by the door," Ethan said. "I'll go through it later." As I set the box down, I could hear Todd talking in the next room. "Teach them both a lesson. Your family has connections everywhere. One phone call to the right person, and that girl's career is over. As for her father, well, how hard could it be to make trouble for some nobody accountant?" "The old man thinks he's won something," the other voice said, "but he has no idea what he's up against. The Carter family doesn't lose to people like him." Ethan glanced toward the living room, then back at me. "You should go," he said. "Of course," I replied. But as I headed for the door, I made sure to walk slowly enough to hear Todd continue. "And if they try to make this public, if they try to embarrass the family, well, there are ways to handle that too. Lawsuits, harassment charges, we could even have the old man audited. The IRS loves tips about suspicious accountants." I left the building with my heart pounding, but not from fear, from anger. They were planning to destroy both Holly and me, and they were discussing it like it was a business strategy. That evening, Holly and I had dinner at a small cafe near her apartment. I told her about my meeting with Gerald, but I didn't mention what I'd overheard at Ethan's place. Not yet. "I've been thinking about what you said," Holly told me, "about trusting you and being willing to help. I want to do whatever it takes to protect us both." "Good, because I think things are going to get worse before they get better." As if on cue, Holly's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. She showed me the screen. The message was from Ethan. "If you betray me, you'll lose everything. Your job, your reputation, your future. Don't make me prove it." I took a photo of the message with my own phone. "Forward that to me," I said, "and from now on, save every communication you get from Ethan or his family." "Dad, I'm scared," Holly admitted. "What if they really can ruin my career? What if—" "Holly," I interrupted gently, "do you remember what I used to tell you when you were little and kids at school were bullying you?" She smiled slightly. "You said bullies are only powerful if you let them be." "That's right. And do you remember what we did about Tommy Hendricks when he wouldn't leave you alone?" Her smile grew wider. "We gathered evidence. We documented every incident, every threat, every time he pushed me or called me names, and then we presented it all to the principal at once, with witnesses and dates and everything." "Tommy never bothered you again after that, did he?" "No, he didn't." I reached across the table and took her hand. "The Carters are just bigger, more expensive bullies. But the same principles apply. We document everything, we gather our evidence, and when the time is right, we present it all at once." "What if that's not enough?" I thought about what I'd overheard in Ethan's apartment, about their casual discussion of destroying our lives like it was a game to them. Then we make sure we have more leverage than they do. That night, I sat in my home office and opened the secure email account Gerald had helped me set up. I uploaded the photo of Ethan's threatening text, along with detailed notes about everything that had happened since the dinner. I also wrote down everything I could remember about the conversation I'd overheard between Ethan and Todd. As I worked, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Paul Benton?" The voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of condescension. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Philip Carter. I think we need to have a conversation about this situation with our children." I saved the document I was working on and leaned back in my chair. What kind of conversation? The kind where reasonable adults work out their differences without involving lawyers or making public scenes. I'm sure we can come to an understanding that benefits everyone involved. What did you have in mind? Well, obviously this engagement is over. Holly has made that quite clear, but there are financial considerations to discuss. Ethan has made significant investments in your daughter's lifestyle over the past 2 years. The car, the jewelry, various expenses. It would be reasonable for her to compensate him for those investments. I felt that cold anger stirring again. Investments? Gifts that were given with the expectation of marriage. Now that the engagement is broken, it's only fair that those gifts be returned or their value compensated. How much are we talking about? Oh, I think $50,000 would cover it. Quite reasonable, really, considering everything Ethan has spent on her. $50,000. More than Holly had in savings, enough to force her into debt or make her feel trapped in the engagement. And if she doesn't agree to this compensation? Philip's voice hardened slightly. Well, then things become more complicated. Ethan has connections in Holly's industry. People talk, you know. Word gets around about unreliable employees, people who don't honor their commitments. It would be unfortunate if Holly's reputation were damaged over something that could be resolved so easily. I see. I'm glad you understand. You seem like a reasonable man, Paul. I'm sure you want what's best for your daughter. After I hung up, I immediately called Gerald and left a voicemail describing the conversation. Then I called Holly. They just made their first official move, I told her, and they made a big mistake. What kind of mistake? They put their threats in writing, and now they've made them verbally too. We're not just dealing with bullies anymore, Holly. We're dealing with people who think they can extort money from us. What do we do? I looked at my computer screen, at the growing file of evidence I was compiling. We let them think they're winning, I said, and we keep giving them room until their own actions trap them completely. The next morning, Gerald called me back early. Paul, what Philip Carter described to you last night could constitute extortion. If you're willing to file a police report, we can start building a case. Not yet, I said. I want to see how far they're willing to go first, but I want everything documented. Understood. In the meantime, I've drawn up some papers for Holly. Power of attorney documents, property protection forms, things like that. Can you bring her by this afternoon? That afternoon, Holly and I sat in the courthouse lobby while Gerald's assistant notarized a stack of legal documents. Holly signed papers giving me power of attorney over her financial affairs if she became unable to handle them herself. She also signed documents that would protect her apartment and savings accounts from any potential lawsuits. This feels so surreal, Holly said as we walked out of the courthouse. 3 days ago, I was engaged to be married, and now I'm protecting my assets from my ex-fiancé's family. 3 days ago, you didn't know who they really were, I pointed out. Our next stop was Holly's bank. I'd called ahead and explained that we needed to review her accounts and make some changes to the signatory information. The bank manager, a pleasant woman named Patricia Vance, met us in her office. Ms. Benton, your father explained that you're going through some personal changes and want to secure your accounts? Holly nodded. I'm ending my engagement, and I'm concerned that my ex-fiancé might try to make financial claims against me. Patricia pulled up Holly's accounts on her computer. I see you have a checking account, a savings account, and a money market account with us. Are any of these joint accounts? No, they're all in my name only. Good. What about automatic payments or transfers? Does anyone else have access to these accounts? Holly thought for a moment. Ethan has my debit card information. He's used it a few times to pay for things when we were out together. Patricia made some notes. I'd recommend changing all your account numbers and getting new cards. We can also set up additional security measures, verbal passwords, transaction limits, things like that. By the time we left the bank, Holly's financial life was locked down tight. Anyone trying to access her accounts would need multiple forms of identification and verification. That evening, we met Marie Keller, Holly's closest friend, at a small cafe near the university where Marie worked as a research librarian. Marie was a sharp, observant woman who'd never particularly liked Ethan, though she'd kept her opinions to herself out of loyalty to Holly. I have to say, I'm not surprised this happened, Marie said after Holly filled her in on the events of the past few days. Ethan always struck me as the type of guy who thinks money solves everything. The problem is, it might, Holly said. His family really does have connections everywhere. I'm worried about what they might do to my career. Marie stirred her coffee thoughtfully. You know, I might be able to help with that. I've been documenting some of Ethan's behavior for months now. What do you mean? I asked. Well, Ethan never liked me much. He thought I was a bad influence on Holly, too independent, too opinionated, but that meant he didn't bother to filter himself around me. I've heard him make some pretty revealing comments about his plans for Holly's future. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her notes app. Here's one from last month. He was complaining about Holly working late on a project, and he said, "Once we're married, I'm going to put a stop to all this career nonsense. A wife's job is to support her husband, not compete with him." Holly's eyes widened. He said that? Oh, there's more. 2 weeks ago at that dinner party at your place, he told Todd that he was planning to gradually isolate Holly from her support system after the wedding. He specifically mentioned wanting to move you away from your father and your friends. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did he say anything else? Marie scrolled through more notes. He talked about how his mother had broken in his father's first wife. Apparently Philip was married before Kalia, and that wife left him after 2 years. Kalia was wife number 2, and according to Ethan, she learned her place much faster. Marie, would you be willing to testify about these conversations if it came to that? I asked. Absolutely. I've been worried about Holly for months, but I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like I was interfering. After we left Marie, Holly and I drove to a storage facility across town. Gerald had mentioned that many financial disputes involved hidden assets or documents, and he'd suggested we do some investigating. How did you know about this place? Holly asked as we pulled up to the row of storage units. I didn't, but I've been thinking about what kind of person Ethan is, and people like him usually have secrets they want to keep hidden. It took some creative thinking and a helpful storage facility manager, but we eventually discovered that Ethan rented a unit under his business name. The manager, a retired police officer named Frank Kowalski, was sympathetic when I explained that we were trying to protect Holly from financial fraud. I've seen this before, Frank said. Guy gets engaged, starts hiding assets so his future wife can't claim them in a divorce. Not saying that's what's happening here, but... He let us look at the rental agreement, which was in Todd Green's name but paid for with Ethan's credit card. More importantly, he mentioned that Ethan and Todd had been there the previous week, moving boxes and talking loudly about protecting the business assets. They seemed pretty upset about something, Frank said. The younger one, your daughter's ex, he kept talking about teaching someone a lesson. That night, I sat in my office compiling everything we'd learned. The threatening text, the extortion attempt from Philip, Marie's documented conversations, the suspicious storage unit. Each piece of evidence was small on its own, but together they were starting to form a picture. My phone rang around 10 o'clock. It was Holly. Dad, I just got another text from Ethan. This one's worse. Read it to me. He says, "You have 48 hours to come to your senses. After that, things get serious. Ask your father how much trouble the IRS can cause for a small-time accountant who might have made some mistakes on his taxes." I felt that cold anger crystallize into something harder. Forward that to me immediately. And Holly? Yeah? They just made their second big mistake. They've moved from threatening you to threatening me directly. What's the first mistake? I looked at the growing file of documents on my desk, at the carefully organized evidence of their threats and schemes. They assumed I was helpless. The next morning, I received a call from Patricia at the bank. Mr. Benton, I wanted to let you know that someone called yesterday asking about your daughter's accounts. They claimed to be from a law firm representing her fiancé, and they wanted to know about recent transactions and account balances. What did you tell them? Nothing, of course. We don't give out account information to unauthorized parties. But I thought you should know that someone is definitely fishing for information. I thanked Patricia and immediately called Gerald. They're escalating, I told him, and I think it's time we started pushing back. What do you have in mind? I think it's time to find out what's in that storage unit. That afternoon, Holly called in sick to work and met me at the storage facility. Frank Kowalski was working again, and when I explained that we had reason to believe the unit contained evidence of financial fraud that affected Holly, he was surprisingly helpful. Look, I can't let you break into someone else's unit, he said. But if your daughter happens to have a key, and if she's listed as an authorized user on the rental agreement... It turned out Holly did have a key. Ethan had given her 1 month ago, claiming it was for business documents he might need her to retrieve. And while she wasn't listed as an authorized user, her name was on several of the documents inside the unit as a business partner in some of Ethan's side ventures. Inside the storage unit, we found boxes of contracts, financial records, and correspondence that painted a disturbing picture. Ethan had been using Holly's name and credit information to secure business loans without her knowledge. He'd also been systematically documenting her assets and income, apparently in preparation for the prenuptial agreement his family had planned to spring on her. But the most damaging discovery was a folder labeled Contingency Plans. Inside were detailed dossiers on Holly, me, and several other people in Holly's life. The dossiers included information about our finances, our employers, our personal relationships, and our potential vulnerabilities. My dossier noted that I was a single point of failure for Holly's emotional stability and suggested that removing his influence would make Holly more manageable. It also included a detailed plan for having me audited by the IRS and investigated by my company's ethics board. Holly's dossier was even more disturbing. It outlined a systematic plan to isolate her from her support system, gradually take control of her finances, and reshape her personality to fit the Carter family's expectations. "This is insane," Holly whispered as she read through the documents. "They were planning to destroy my entire life." I photographed every document with my phone, then carefully put everything back exactly as we'd found it. As we left the storage facility, my phone rang. It was Philip Carter again. "Paul, I trust you've had time to consider our conversation. Have you spoken to Holly about the compensation arrangement?" "I've spoken to her," I said. "And?" "She's asked me to handle the negotiations." There was a pause. "I see. Well, that's probably for the best. Men can often resolve these matters more efficiently than emotional young women." The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench. "What exactly are you proposing?" 50,000, as I mentioned, plus the return of the engagement ring and the car. Holly can keep the other gifts. We're not unreasonable people. And in exchange? In exchange, this all goes away quietly. No drama, no public embarrassment, no complications for anyone's career. I'll need to discuss this with Holly. Of course, but don't take too long, Paul. As I'm sure you understand, our patience isn't unlimited. After I hung up, Holly looked at me with concern. "You're not actually considering paying them, are you?" I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Holly, do you remember what I taught you about chess when you were little? You said the best players make their opponents think they're winning right up until the moment they lose." "That's right, and right now, the Carters think they're winning." That evening, I called Gerald and told him about everything we'd discovered in the storage unit. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Paul, this is much more serious than I initially thought. What you've described could constitute identity theft, fraud, stalking, and conspiracy. We're not just talking about a messy breakup anymore." "What do you recommend?" "I recommend we take this to the police. Tonight." An hour later, Holly and I sat in the lobby of the downtown police station, waiting to speak with a detective. The desk sergeant had been sympathetic when I explained that we needed to report threats and potential financial fraud, and he'd called in Detective Dennis Murphy, who specialized in white-collar crime. Detective Murphy was a solid, professional man in his 40s who listened carefully as I walked him through everything that had happened. I showed him the threatening texts, played him the recording I'd made of Philip's phone call. With Gerald's advice, I'd started recording all calls from the Carter family, and described what we'd found in the storage unit. Mr. Benton, I have to ask, do you have legal access to that storage unit? Holly spoke up. I have a key, and my name is on several of the documents inside. I had no idea what was being stored there, but I was apparently listed as a business partner in some of my ex-fiancé's ventures. Detective Murphy made notes. And you're saying that these documents show evidence of identity theft and fraud? They show that Ethan Carter used my daughter's personal information to secure loans without her knowledge, and that he and his family have been systematically planning to control and manipulate her life. I'd like to see copies of those documents. I handed him a flash drive containing photos of everything we'd found. There are also detailed plans for retaliating against both of us if we don't comply with their demands. Detective Murphy plugged the flash drive into his computer and spent several minutes reviewing the files. His expression grew more serious as he read. This is definitely concerning, he said finally. I'm going to open a case file and start an investigation. In the meantime, I want you both to be very careful. Document any further contact from the Carter family and call me immediately if you feel threatened. He handed us each a business card. I'm also going to recommend that you consider getting a restraining order if the harassment continues. As we left the police station, Holly squeezed my arm. Dad, I feel like we're finally fighting back instead of just defending ourselves. We are, I said, but we're not done yet. Tomorrow, we're going to give the Carters exactly what they've been asking for. What do you mean? I thought about the final piece of my plan, the one I hadn't told anyone about yet. Tomorrow, we're going to accept their invitation to negotiate. The next morning, I called Philip Carter back. I've discussed your proposal with Holly, and we're prepared to negotiate. Excellent. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. However, we'd like to handle this properly. Through lawyers, with everything documented. We want to make sure there are no misunderstandings. There was a pause. That seems unnecessarily formal for what should be a simple arrangement between families. Philip, you're asking for $50,000. That's not simple for people like us. We want to make sure we understand exactly what we're agreeing to. Very well. Where would you like to meet? I'd been hoping he'd ask that. Actually, Ethan suggested his office might be appropriate. He mentioned that his business partner Todd could serve as a witness, and having a neutral business environment might keep things professional. It was a complete lie, but Philip didn't know that. I suppose that would work. When were you thinking? Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock? Fine. But Paul, I hope you understand that our patience really is limited. If this drags on, things will become more complicated. I understand completely. After I hung up, I called Gerald. It's time for the final phase. Are you sure about this, Paul? Once we do this, there's no going back. They crossed the line when they threatened Holly's future, they crossed it again when they threatened mine, and they obliterated it when we found those documents in the storage unit. I'm not just protecting my daughter anymore, Gerald. I'm making sure they can't do this to anyone else. That afternoon, I sat in my home office and reviewed everything one more time. The threatening texts and phone calls, all carefully documented and recorded. The evidence from the storage unit, photographed and cataloged. The police report, filed and assigned a case number. The financial documents showing how they'd used Holly's information without her consent. But I had one more piece of evidence that I hadn't shared with anyone yet, not even Gerald or Holly. Something I'd discovered during my years as an accountant, something that had been nagging at the back of my mind since this whole situation began. 3 years ago, I'd been asked to review some financial documents for a client who was considering a business partnership. The potential partner was a company called Carter Holdings, and something about their books hadn't looked right. I'd advised my client to walk away from the deal, and I'd kept copies of the documents that had raised red flags. At the time, I hadn't connected Carter Holdings to Ethan's family. But after Holly started dating Ethan, I'd done some research and discovered that Carter Holdings was Philip Carter's primary business entity. The same Carter Holdings that had been using questionable accounting practices and potentially fraudulent tax filings. I'd kept quiet about it because it wasn't my business and because I didn't want to complicate Holly's relationship. But now, with everything that had happened, those documents had become very relevant indeed. I pulled out the file and reviewed the evidence: inflated business expenses, questionable charitable deductions, income shifted between entities to avoid taxes. Nothing that would necessarily result in criminal charges, but more than enough to trigger a very thorough and very expensive IRS audit. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Holly. Dad, I just got a call from HR. They want to see me first thing Monday morning. A sudden chill ran through me. What about? They wouldn't say, but the woman who called said it was regarding concerns that had been brought to their attention about my professional conduct. Holly, listen to me carefully. Don't panic, and don't do anything until after our meeting tomorrow. Can you call in sick on Monday? I guess so, but Dad, what if they fire me? What if... They're not going to fire you. This is just the Carters trying to pressure us before tomorrow's meeting. They want us scared and desperate when we sit down to negotiate. Are you sure? I thought about the comprehensive file of evidence sitting on my desk, about Detective Murphy's promise to investigate, about the IRS documents that could destroy Philip Carter's business empire. I'm sure. Holly, tomorrow afternoon, this all ends. That evening, I had dinner with Holly and Marie at a small restaurant near my house. I wanted Holly to be somewhere safe and surrounded by people who cared about her before tomorrow's confrontation. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Marie asked. Nervous isn't the right word, I said. Focused, maybe. Determined. Holly reached across the table and took my hand. Dad, I know you've been planning something, and I trust you completely, but I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that whatever happens tomorrow, you won't do anything that could hurt you. I can't lose you, too. I squeezed her hand. Holly, everything I'm doing is legal and documented. The worst thing that could happen to me tomorrow is that the Carters get angry. And the best thing? I smiled. The best thing is that they get exactly what they deserve. Later that night, I called Detective Murphy to give him an update on tomorrow's meeting. Mr. Benton, I have to advise you to be very careful. If you're planning some kind of confrontation, it could complicate our investigation. I'm not planning a confrontation, Detective. I'm planning to present evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that shows the Carter family has been systematically committing fraud for years, not just against my daughter, but against the federal government. There was a long pause. Mr. Benton, if you have evidence of federal crimes, you need to turn that over to the appropriate authorities. I will. Tomorrow afternoon, after I've given the Carters a chance to explain themselves. I spent the rest of the evening organizing my files and preparing for tomorrow. Every document was copied and backed up. Every recording was saved to multiple devices. Every piece of evidence was carefully labeled and organized. By midnight, I had everything ready. 3 thick folders, each containing enough evidence to destroy a different aspect of the Carter family's life. 1 folder for the police, documenting their threats and harassment. 1 folder for Holly's HR department, proving that any complaints against her were retaliatory and baseless. And 1 folder for the IRS, documenting years of questionable financial practices by Carter Holdings. As I finally went to bed, I thought about the past week and how much had changed. 7 days ago, I'd been a quiet accountant who just wanted to support his daughter's happiness. Now I was about to walk into a room full of people who thought they could destroy my family, and I was going to teach them exactly how wrong they were. The Carters thought they held all the power because they had money and connections, but they'd forgotten something important. Power isn't about what you have, it's about what you know, and when you choose to use it. Tomorrow, they were going to learn that lesson the hard way. My phone buzzed with 1 final text message before I fell asleep. It was from Ethan. Hope you're ready to be reasonable tomorrow, old man. This is your last chance to do this the easy way. I smiled in the darkness and deleted the message, but not before I'd forwarded it to Detective Murphy, Gerald, and the secure email account where I'd been documenting everything. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. At exactly 2 o'clock the next afternoon, Holly and I walked into the gleaming glass lobby of Ethan's office building. The sales firm occupied 3 floors of the downtown high-rise, and their main conference room was on the 15th floor, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Ethan was waiting for us in the lobby, dressed in an expensive suit and wearing the kind of confident smile that suggested he thought he'd already won. Paul, Holly, I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this. Holly didn't respond, and I simply nodded. Shall we go up? The conference room was exactly what I'd expected. A long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs with a wall-mounted television, and a small army of business executives pretending to work on their laptops while obviously preparing to watch the show. Philip and Kalia Carter sat at the head of the table like royalty holding court. Todd Green was there with another man I didn't recognize, probably their lawyer. Paul? Philip stood and extended his hand as if we were old friends. Thank you for coming. I think we can resolve this quickly and amicably. I shook his hand and smiled politely. I certainly hope so. We took seats across from the Carter family, and I placed a single manila folder on the table in front of me. Holly sat beside me, her face calm but her hands clenched in her lap. Now then, Philip began, as we discussed, we're looking for a simple resolution. $50,000 to cover Ethan's investments in Holly's lifestyle, plus return of the ring and the car. In exchange, we all move on with our lives, and there are no further complications. That seems reasonable, I said, opening my folder and pulling out a single sheet of paper. However, I have a few questions about the specifics. Kalia leaned forward. What kind of questions? Well, for instance, I'm curious about this car that Ethan supposedly gave Holly as a gift. According to the DMV records I pulled, the car was purchased with a loan that lists Holly as the primary borrower. Ethan co-signed, but the payments have been coming out of Holly's checking account for the past 8 months. Ethan's confident expression flickered. That's just a technicality. I arranged the financing. You arranged for my daughter to take on debt for a car you then claimed was a gift from you. I pulled out another document. Similarly, this engagement ring that you want returned? According to the receipt I found in your storage unit, it was purchased with a credit card that was opened in Holly's name. She's been paying for her own engagement ring without knowing it. The room had gone very quiet. Several of the business executives had stopped pretending to work and were openly staring now. Philip's voice was sharp. How did you get access to private financial records? The same way your son got access to Holly's credit information to open accounts without her knowledge. I pulled out a thick stack of papers. Identity theft is a federal crime, Philip. So is fraud. So is using someone else's personal information to secure loans. Todd Green spoke up for the first time. You can't prove any of that. I smiled at him. Actually, I can. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. This contains recordings of every phone conversation I've had with your family over the past week, including Philip's explicit threats about destroying Holly's career and having me audited by the IRS. Kalia's face had gone pale. Recording private conversations without consent is illegal. In some states, yes. In this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. I consented to recording my own conversations. I pulled out another stack of documents. These are copies of everything we found in Ethan's storage unit. Financial records, personal dossiers, detailed plans for systematically controlling and manipulating my daughter's life. Ethan jumped to his feet. You broke into my storage unit. That's breaking and entering. Holly had a key that you gave her. She also discovered that you'd been listing her as a business partner in several ventures without her knowledge, which gave her legal access to the documents. I looked directly at Ethan. Did you really think you could use her name on loan applications and business filings without her ever finding out? Holly spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. I've spent the past 3 days learning exactly how much of my life you'd stolen from me, Ethan. My credit, my identity, my future. You weren't planning to marry me. You were planning to own me. Philip tried to regain control of the situation. This is all very dramatic, but it doesn't change the basic facts. Ethan invested significant money in this relationship, and he deserves compensation. I pulled out the final stack of documents from my folder. Let's talk about investments, Philip. I'm curious about some of the investment strategies used by Carter Holdings over the past 5 years. For the first time, Philip looked genuinely worried. What are you talking about? Tax filings that don't match business expenses, charitable deductions for organizations that don't seem to exist, income shifted between shell companies to avoid paying federal taxes. I spread the documents across the table. I'm an accountant, Philip. I know what fraudulent books look like. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see Todd Green frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to warn someone. You see, I continued, while you were busy threatening my daughter's career and planning to destroy my life, I was doing what I do best. I was following the money. And the money led me to some very interesting discoveries about your business practices. Kalia's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? I want you to leave my daughter alone, permanently. No more threats, no more harassment, no more attempts to interfere with her career or her life. I stood up and began gathering my documents. I also want a written apology for the way you treated both of us, and I want Ethan to sign documents releasing any claim to Holly's property or assets. Philip's face was red with rage. And if we refuse? I paused in my packing. Then copies of all these documents go to the IRS, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, Holly's HR department, and every business journalist in the city. I wonder how Carter Holdings investors would react to learning about your creative accounting practices. Ethan lunged across the table, grabbing for my folder. You can't do this. You're nobody. You're nothing. Security guards appeared as if from nowhere, restraining Ethan as he thrashed and shouted. The carefully controlled business meeting had erupted into chaos, with executives scrambling away from the table and Kalia Carter sobbing into her hands. Actually, I said calmly, closing my folder and standing up, I'm somebody who kept very good records. As Holly and I walked toward the door, I could hear Philip shouting threats about lawyers and lawsuits. But his voice sounded desperate now, not confident. He knew exactly what those documents could do to his empire. Detective Murphy was waiting in the hallway outside the conference room, along with 2 federal agents I didn't recognize. Mr. Benton, I believe you have some evidence to turn over? I handed him a copy of everything I'd just presented. I think you'll find it very interesting reading. Behind us, the glass-walled conference room had become a fishbowl of panic and recrimination. Ethan was still being restrained by security while his parents argued frantically with their lawyer. Todd Green was trying to slip out a side door but found his way blocked by another federal agent. Holly took my arm as we walked toward the elevators. Is it really over? It's over, I said. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I could see Ethan through the glass wall of the conference room, pointing at us and screaming something I couldn't hear. His face was twisted with rage and disbelief, the face of a man who had finally learned that money and connections couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. The elevator descended smoothly toward the lobby, carrying us away from the chaos we'd left behind and toward whatever came next.